And if you look at the funding trends, you're right, we're breaking all of these records in terms of humanitarian need, but funding trends are not matching that kind of pace. It's almost like we need a rebalancing between what we fund to development and what we fund to humanitarian aid. Is that something you basically agree with? We need a larger focus on humanitarian budgets?
What I see is in more vulnerable environments, even today, the share of humanitarian budget is much higher. Globally, humanitarian spending is 10%, development 90%. In fragile environments, it is more 25-30 to 70-75. And in the most dramatic circumstances, for example, in the Horn of Africa during the famine in 2011, it was 50-50. But if we want this share of humanitarian budgets not to have to shoot up, development has to come and reduce risks, reduce the vulnerability of communities and countries to shocks. In other words, development funding has to accept objectives that are related to reducing the humanitarian load of the future, if you wish.
That's the whole resilience
agenda. And that is the resilience agenda. In other words, if we don't want humanitarian budgets to have to continue to go up and up and up and up and up, development funding today has to help us reduce the humanitarian costs of the future. Somewhat easier to do when we talk about resilience to natural disasters, to floods, to droughts, to storms. Much more difficult in conflict prevention, conflict resolution. But it is exactly in conflict prevention, conflict resolution where there is huge amount of work that development and the political side can do and are not quite yet doing enough.
And you mentioned the World Bank, and it sounds like they are starting to do this and funding the humanitarian side through some of the humanitarian organizations. I know you're here for the spring meetings. As part of this looking ahead at where the industry is going, what do you think is the role of the World Bank down the road? Obviously, they're undergoing a big reform today, but where do you see them moving as part of the overall infrastructure of this industry in the future?
They absolutely have to accept a bigger responsibility analytically in terms of policy and in terms of operations for fragile states. With increased fragility, the focus of development organizations to reducing fragility has to go up. With the same token, humanitarian organizations have to accept more role in transition, in this transition from relief to rehabilitation and development. And it is very interesting to note that ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, has changed their mandate to expand to include relief, rehabilitation in this transitional phase. So both communities, the development and the humanitarian communities, have an obligation to walk towards each other and build these bridges that would make use of resources more effective in anticipating crisis, acting early, reducing the burden on people and communities. I would like to see the world more stable. And yes, development is the best way to increase resilience. But I also am realistically assessing the factors that impact today and the future. And if I can say, we, the humanitarians, we are like the canary in the mine. We feel the problems before the rest of the world is to feel them. And there is more trouble ahead. So we have to build a united front to weather it.
Now, that's a wonderful message, and I wonder, what does it mean for your future? What's next for you? Your term is about to end this year. You're going to go back to academia, where you spent a little time. You were at the World Bank, obviously, for a long time. You've been in development. You've been in the humanitarian side. What's the future for Kristalina Georgieva?
Today I have no time to stop and think about it. But let's talk in October when my mandate ends, and I will be very happy to discuss with you what I'm doing next.
Well, I'm sure whatever it is, it's going to be very impactful. You've been one of the great leaders on these issues. So thank you so much for your leadership, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.